Hey guys, it's Justine here from I Should Read That, and today I am bringing you my September wrap-up. And the month of September was not a great one for me. I will fully admit I didn't read a ton of books. There's a lot of reasons for that I'll get into in a minute. I kind of I don't know what it was. Maybe I was burned out from the newts and from readathons. I read a lot of stuff in the month of August. I think I read 11 books in August, and I think I burned out a little bit, and it was just not my best reading month. I read 5 books and I did DNF 2 books as well. So I can talk about kind of the stuff that happened this month and everything like that. And if you're not interested in mental health stuff, which is totally fair enough, don't feel bad about it or for skipping or whatever. If I remember, I'll put a timestamp on the screen so you can go ahead and skip to the book stuff, because presumably you guys are here for the book stuff. But the month of September was a tough one because, as I have said on this channel, I have anxiety. I have severe anxiety and I have severe depression, according to the NHS. So it's something that kind of is managed up and down. I can go long periods of feeling okay and then have suddenly months where I'm not feeling okay, all of this. So my main issue in September and for parts of August and even before that is anxiety, and it's something that I've not really dealt with before in the past, and it is something that I wish I had dealt with in the past. And I think that part of the reason that I'm telling you guys about this now is because so many people talking about their mental health online has really helped me to get my own treated. So that's why I'm talking about it here. I'm not hugely comfortable talking about my mental health. I still have that kind of stigma attached to it where I'm like, well, what if someone from my work sees this, whatever. But I've talked to my boss about it. We put in plans to make sure that I can still work and can work from home if I have an anxiety flare up, all of this. It doesn't really matter. My family knows about it, my friends know about it, my work knows about it. I don't know why I'm still nervous about this, but I think that it's just a long-standing thing for me. So as I was saying, I had a really bad anxiety kind of flare up, I guess I would call it, and it was really, really struggling. And if it's not something that you deal with, it can be really difficult in the moment to realize what's happening and what's going on. It's the same thing with depression. And to an outside person, they can sit there and be like, well, obviously, you're having an anxiety episode, you're having a depressive episode, it's so obvious, but you'll be sitting there just thinking that the world is ending and not realizing what's actually happening. So I have gone ahead and I have actually, for the first time, started talking therapy, which is really exciting. I really love my therapist. She's awesome. She's really, really cool, and I was very lucky to find someone that I really liked the kind of first time around, and I really appreciated how kind of upfront and honest she was when she was saying make sure that you find the right person for you. If I'm not the right person for you, please don't continue to come and see me if you're not comfortable, because that makes no sense, and I really appreciated that. So she's awesome. And I've actually also started medication. I've started antidepressants that also treat the anxiety, and I've been on them for a week. This is my 1-week anniversary of being on them, and guys, my life is completely and totally changed, it feels like. I don't know if it's the placebo effect. I don't know if this just kicked in really quickly for me or whatever. As my lovely therapist says, it doesn't really matter as long as you're feeling better. And I have now realized, kind of having my baseline mood being brought up so much, I have realized that I have not been myself for a very long time. I've not really been feeling like myself for about a year and a half. So if medication is something that makes you nervous like it did for me for a long time, go ahead and talk to your doctor, get all the facts, make a decision for yourself. It's not the right thing for a lot of people. This is possibly going to be the beginning of finding the exact right thing for me, but I can just say from my own experience that this has been kind of amazing. It's really, I think, is really going to be a game-changing thing for me. So that's kind of what's been happening in September. Because I've had all this stuff going on with mental health and everything, I have not been reading. And if I'm reading too much, that usually means that I'm in a depressive episode. I read, I think 16 books in 1 month last year, and that was sort of at the height of one of those episodes. And if I'm not reading at all, there usually apparently seems to be an anxiety episode is happening. So for me, this wasn't a great month for reading. I didn't finish a book until I think the 15th of September, which was a huge deal for me because usually at that point I've read like 3, and I really struggled with getting stuff done. I struggled to keep my interest in certain things. I really pushed through on some stuff, and I read 5 books basically, as I think I've already said. But I am hoping that I'm going to be able to sort of revamp my reading. I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to really get back in the reading mood, which I feel like I'm starting to get there now. So that's all good. So after that long preamble, I am going to actually tell you about the books that I read and that I DNF'd this month, starting with the books that I DNF'd, and there are 2 of them, and my reason for DNFing them are very different. And I don't think that this has anything to do with sort of my mental health and everything like that this month. I think that I just genuinely didn't enjoy these books. So as per usual, just because I didn't like these doesn't mean you shouldn't try them. They still sound interesting, definitely give them a go, especially because one of these is by a debut author. So this first one is that debut author. This is The Nightjar by Deborah Hewitt. I read, I think, just over 100 pages of this book before I set it aside, and I've actually filmed a DNFing video that I'll put up at some point. I have a ton of unedited videos before I went into this kind of slump that I have to actually like post for you guys. So I talk about it a little bit there, but basically this book started really strong. It starts in modern London, and this character's having all this crazy stuff happening to her. She has a box that arrives on her porch that says to not open it, and then she's heading to work. She has this strange encounter with this elderly woman who then dies, and now she's being kind of like followed by this man who keeps saying all these strange things to her. Started out great, really great. And from there, it kind of went downhill because this has one of my least favorite fantasy tropes ever, and it drove me crazy. Basically, this book is very guilty of I hope this makes sense, the person with knowledge of the fantasy world or the magic or whatever, keeping the main character in the dark and then getting annoyed at the main character for not knowing what's going on. It's super specific, but it is definitely a fantasy trope. It is definitely a trope that I think is kind of outdated at this point, and I hate it. I find it so annoying. Why don't you just take 5 minutes, have a conversation, be like, listen, we're gonna go into this alternate London. These are the things you need to know about it. These are the things you shouldn't do. Great. And then, you know, go on their way. I was really annoyed with Crowley, who unfortunately is David Tennant in my head because of Good Omens, so that's real disappointing because I love him. I was just really annoyed with his character, Crowley, and the way that he was treating our main character's name, I don't even remember, Alice maybe? Alice. And I at some point I was just like, you know what, you're an asshole. And I put this book aside, and I'm really glad that I did. So that's not a trope that bothers a lot of people, but if it's something you don't like, I would say this might not be the book for you, but I do have friends who have read this and really loved it, so definitely keep that in mind. The other DNF that I have is one that I'm really disappointed in because I had really high hopes for this book. It sounded really great. I have read and enjoyed one of this author's previous books, and I really wanted to love this, and I just didn't. This is The Beautiful by Renee Ahdieh. This is, of course, a huge, mega upcoming release in October, and it is kind of heralded as the return of a vampire. Oh, the vampire's never really gone away. Vampire books are still popular. They're just not kind of like as popular as they were when Twilight was a thing. I just didn't enjoy this. For a book that's sort of really hyped up and marketed as a vampire book, there's almost no vampires in it. I think I got like 37% into this. I was reading actually a digital copy, and I didn't get to tell them to not send me a physical copy in time, and this like showed up just like the day after I DNF'd it, and I feel terrible. I'm gonna give this to a friend, I think. But I think I made it like 150 pages or so into this book, and we had so little plot. We had minimal vampiring, which I thought was really disappointing, and apparently that's something that kind of persists throughout the book from the kind of spoilery things that I have seen. And I really struggled with the main character. Her name is Celine, and this is a historical set book, I think 1870 something, and she arrives on a boat to New Orleans from France, and she's obviously fleeing something, some terrible, terrible thing that she's done or that has happened to her. And she basically has her trip paid for by a convent, and she's going to go into this convent and live amongst the nuns. And she is very much a kind of fiery young woman. This is not a life that's going to suit her, and she gets herself into a lot of trouble and all of that, which is great, but she was also super meek. She really felt like she didn't know who she was. She had all these kind of strange ideas about herself, which I thought didn't really fit with the character. I didn't really know what she was trying to say with this character, and I just didn't buy it. I also wasn't hugely keen on the love interest. I find it really difficult to enjoy sometimes like bantery books because the banter doesn't always work out, and I felt like all that banter kind of fell flat for this. I just wasn't enjoying it. I found it really slow, which is such a shame because like The Nightjar, it starts out really strong. It has this really atmospheric descriptions of New Orleans, arriving from the sea and going into the winding streets for the first time, which I thought was fantastic. But again, this one just didn't work for me. I know a lot of people are loving it. I know a lot of people feel very similar to me. So this is definitely one, if you are interested, pick it up and make your own decision about it because it seems like everyone has a different opinion. So now we're moving on to the books that I actually did read and complete this month. There are 5 of them, and I really enjoyed most of them. Most of these are 4 or 5 star reads. A really spectacular month. There is, however, one exception, which is a huge disappointment. I'll get to that later. In the order that I have read these books, the very first one that I read this month was The Death of Mrs Westaway by Ruth Ware. She is a very well-known thriller writer. She's a British thriller writer, and I've heard her name, you know, about, and I've never read any of her books. And as I always say, there's nothing that I love more than a good thriller, and I feel like I don't get that experience very often because thrillers just tend to fall kind of flat for me. So I had really high hopes going into this, and I really, really enjoyed it. The Death of Mrs Westaway follows a character named Harriet, and she is a tarot reader on the piers in Brighton, and she is barely scraping by. She's in horrible debt. She's in debt to actually a really terrible loan shark, and she basically has 1 week to pay them a huge amount of money, or there's the threat of some serious violence. And she is completely distraught. She comes home one day and she finds a letter from a solicitor saying her name, Harriet Westaway, is the benefactor of a will. Someone has left her a ton of money. Her mysterious grandmother has left her a ton of money, and she is not this person. She is indeed Harriet Westaway. However, she doesn't have any living grandparents. She knows that this letter is not addressed to her. However, she's in such a dire situation that she decides to go ahead and pretend to be this Harriet Westaway and go to Cornwall to kind of collect her inheritance, to meet this family, collect her inheritance. She doesn't know what she's got, she doesn't know how much, she just knows that it's really, really going to help her out. I think part of what I loved about this is the fact that it's kind of a small scale book, if that makes sense. So other thrillers that I've loved, Gone Girl, and I've loved The Girl on the Train. Those books feel, although they're also stories that are happening to basically one person or 2 people, they feel much grander in scope. You know, there's this horrible thing that they are going through, or they're unreliable narrators or whatever. And this felt like a much smaller scale situation, I guess, because the main conflict is if she goes ahead and takes this money, if she can fool them, because she's really good at cold reading, hence the tarot card thing, she will be able to commit fraud and basically steal the money from this family who are grieving for the death of Mrs. Westaway. And she has so much conflict about that. She's really conflicted. She shows multiple times that she's a good person. She's not comfortable with this thing that she's doing, but she's gonna do it anyway. And because it felt like such a small scale thing, I really loved that, and I feel like I really connected with her as a character. I thought she was really, really interesting, obviously flawed, but she, the way that she sort of reacts to different situations and the way that she communicates with this family and the way she feels about that is really, really interesting to me. So like with most thrillers, I don't want to say too much because I feel like there's a lot that you need to discover on your own, but if you are looking for a good thriller, this is a great one. It's super like atmospheric. It's a really, really great fall or winter read. I would definitely add this to your TBR pile. I just thought it was great. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. The second book that I read this month was the disappointing one, and I know that this is another one where people are so mixed on it. Some people loved this book, some people hated this book. I don't fall quite into hate, but I definitely fall into very, very disappointed. This is Dark Dawn by J. Kristoff. Of course, this is the final book in the Nevernight Chronicles, the last one, the one we were all waiting for, and I was really, really disappointed in this book for a few reasons, and a lot of them are super spoilery, so I'm not gonna say anything, but if you want to chat about this book via DM, message me on Twitter because I definitely want to discuss my feelings on this. I'm trying to figure out what I can say about this without spoiling anything. So, okay, so Mia, who's our main character, is someone I love in the first 2 books. I love the first 2 books. Like, this was my favorite series until this book came around. She's someone who, in the first 2 books, I felt really towed the line perfectly between a completely awesome, badass, you know, assassin character and being totally ridiculous and kind of eye-rolly. This book, she kind of tipped over into eye-roll territory for me. This didn't feel like Mia. I don't know what it was about Dark Dawn, but this did not feel like the character that I have come to know and love. It didn't feel right. There were a lot of decisions that she made and a lot of things that she did that didn't feel like her. Yeah, that's all I'm gonna say about that. I also feel like this book veered from revenge story, which I was totally here for, into weird fantasy territory. And obviously I love fantasy, but the thing that I love about the Nevernight Chronicles is this insane revenge plot that she has, that she's going on. She's the whole purpose of this series is to show this one character, Mia, who's taking revenge on the people who had her family killed when she was a child. And that's the best part of the books, but there's also kind of like a fantasy, almost like it felt like a subplot in the other books and it became plot in this. And the way that that was incorporated into the story, I really didn't enjoy. I just really didn't like that at all. I was really hoping it would stay subplot and it didn't. I also really hated the way this book ended. You can read into that what you will. I think that a lot of people will have very mixed feelings about how this book ends. Some people will be really happy, some people will be really unhappy. I fall into unhappy territory, unfortunately. Maybe this is why I don't finish series very often. I worry that they're gonna let me down, and I really felt let down by Dark Dawn. And don't get me wrong, there are parts of it that I really, really enjoyed. There is one of the kind of big things that was going to be revealed was who the narrator of this story is, because it's someone telling you the story of Mia's life, and I loved that revelation and everything that kind of had to do with that. That was really amazing. There are a couple of characters who get introduced in this book who I love so much. There's one in particular who I just adore, who's kind of like a ship's captain. And there were a lot of good things about this book, but for me, the bad overshadowed it in a big way. So Dark Dawn was a huge disappointment for me. I gave this 2 out of 5 stars, which is shocking because I gave, I think, the first one 4.5 and the second one 5. So that's a pretty big dip. After the disappointment of Dark Dawn, I did decide to try another Ruth Ware book. So I was borrowing this from my sister. This is The Turn of the Key, and this is her newest book, and I loved this. I'm completely obsessed with this book. It was so good. So this book follows a girl named Rowan, and Rowan is a live-in nanny at this sort of fabulous smart house up in the Scottish Highlands, a very, very remote location. She's looking after the two children for this family who are kind of architects, hence the really fancy house. And the book opens with Rowan writing a letter to a lawyer to say, I did not kill that child. No one is listening to me. No one is paying attention to me. I want to tell you my story. Please, please read it. Listen to me, represent me, because I didn't kill this child. It's a strong start, really. And the book is basically told in letters to her solicitor, or the barrister that she's hoping to have represent her. So she has a limited amount of time, a limited number of days to basically convince him. I think it's 140 days because she's in a Scottish prison, and that's how long they can hold you without trial. So it's basically her recounting, with the knowledge of what happens later on and how this kind of resolves, recounting her story of how she came to become this live-in nanny and the events that unfolded. And this is quite spooky. It definitely falls into the kind of gothic side of things, which makes me so incredibly happy. I loved this so much. Again, thriller, I don't want to say a huge amount about it because I think you'll really get a lot out of it if you go ahead and just know as little as possible. But if you're looking for a spooky book for October, maybe, if you're looking for maybe a Halloween type book, this is a fantastic one to try. I really, really enjoy this. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. It is fantastic. And I went ahead and read another amazing book, not a thriller this time. We're going back to fantasy. This is a book that you guys are probably sick and tired of me talking about. I have a full review of this book. I've been talking about it nonstop ever since I found out that it was coming out, ever since I got a copy of it. I loved this. I'm so happy I did because it was such a hugely anticipated release for me. This is A Little Hatred by Joe Abercrombie. So I know I've gone over this a million times, but just really quickly to go over it once more. This is the first book in a brand new trilogy in the first law world. Joe Abercrombie is best known for his first law books, starting with the original trilogy, which starts with The Blade itself, which is where I would recommend you start. Don't necessarily start with this one. And there are 3 standalone books, book of short stories, and then finally we have this one. The series is called The Age of Madness, and it is so good. I really, really enjoyed it. I loved the characters, I love the setting, I love his writing and his humor, also mixed with all the grim awfulness, the realities of war. Everything about his books I adore. I really, really enjoy them. If you like grimdark, you should absolutely try him if you haven't already. He's just a fantastic author. I'm obviously fangirling. I am going to get to meet him, should all things go according to plan, in October for GlanceFest. If you're going to GlanceFest, let me know, please. I'm super excited. I'm gonna try not to embarrass myself and Scottish husband in front of him. That might happen though. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. It is just so, so fantastic. If you're a fan of his books, you will love this. And last but not least is the final book I read, and I like barely squeezed this in. Like, I finished it, I think 10 o'clock on the 30th of September, so it still counts. And I cannot tell you how much I loved this book. This is easily going to be one of my favorite books of the year. It is so good and like just made me feel all the things in a really unexpected way. This book completely took me by surprise. This is The Bone Ships by R.J. Barker. The Bone Ship's pretty self-explanatory. It takes place in a world that is mostly ocean and sea, and our main character is the crew member on a bone ship, a ship made of bones, but they're not just any bones. They are the bones of these massive giant sea dragons that have been hunted to extinction. In the beginning of this book, he is drinking his life away. He is what's called the shipwife, or the captain of this ship of the dead. He's been condemned to death to serve on one of these ships, and he's been elected shipwife. And he is basically drinking his life away, being totally miserable, with pretty good reason. And when the book opens, he basically is kind of usurped by this woman named Maius, and she is this incredibly famous sort of figure in this particular region in the 100 Isles because she's called Lucky Maius. She's sort of defied all kinds of life-threatening situations. She's a total badass. She's amazing. She takes over the ship, and he is really kind of conflicted about this because he's obviously not doing his duty on this ship, but also he's been usurped by someone. Like, come on, that doesn't feel good. So it's kind of, there is a plot, definitely, but it doesn't come into play until like 100 some odd pages. You really don't find out much about what the actual plot of the book is for a while, because this is really a in-depth character study, not just of Joran, who is our main character, and Maius, but also all of the crew, the deck children of this particular ship, the Tide Child. So, fun fact about me, I used to sail with my dad and my sister mostly, and I could sail a ship before, well, a boat, like a small sailboat, before I could drive a car. And although I was definitely a sullen, depressed teenager at the time and didn't appreciate the sailing that we all did together, I have so many amazing memories of sailing and being on the sea, and I have such a strong connection to the ocean. And this book is so wonderfully written and so atmospheric and gorgeous. Like, it sounds so incredibly cheesy to say, but like, as you're reading it, you can like feel the wind on your face and the spray of the sea and all of that. But it truly, like really, it evoked so many good feelings for me, because of its connection to the ocean and the way that the ocean is written and life at sea is written. It was just gorgeous. I couldn't really figure out, other than that, what it was that made this book so special, and then my friend Hugh, who is a blogger at the Fantasy Inn, who read this book at about the same time as I did, made a really good point and said that the great thing about this is that it's optimistic. It's sort of sneaky optimistic because it does seem like it takes place in this really grim world. It's this really violent way of life, this really cruel way of life. But underneath all of that, it's so optimistic. And it's optimistic in the way that people are good. And if you give someone a chance, particularly a second chance, because this book is all about second chances, people can be good and people can prove themselves to be good. And that is just a wonderful, wonderful thing. I love the characters in this book, I love the atmosphere of this book, I love the writing in this book. I had thought that it would be difficult to get into because reading, even having knowledge of like some of the bits and pieces of boats and ships, I really struggle to read nautical books that take place on boats because you basically need a whole new vocabulary. You need like to learn a new language in order to read things like Patrick O'Brien's books, and that was not the case here. I thought that he did a really, really good job of making everything feel really familiar. There's some really interesting gender politics that go into this. There's some amazing, you know, world building and these creatures who control the wind were the best thing ever, and like, oh, it's just so incredibly good. If you're looking for a really like plotty, fast-paced book, this is not going to be the one for you. However, if you are looking for a book to savor and a book to really like sink into and really get absorbed into and just get swept away by, as you pick it up, please. Oh my god, this is going to be one of my favorite books of the year. Orbit is killing it. They're knocking it out of the park with their publications recently, and like all of my favorite books of the year have been Orbit books, so I feel like that says a lot. I'm rambling. I'm gonna stop. 5 out of 5 stars. It's so good. So those are all the books that I read in September and the books that I DNF'd this month. So I have really high hopes for having a better reading month this month. I am hoping to have a better like filming month. I've missed you guys. I feel like I try my best to make this channel feel like a way to like talk to you guys and communicate with you guys, and I've missed not being around. So hopefully I will be scheduling videos in again, uploading videos, being able to respond to comments a little bit faster. I'm hoping that things will get back to normal. In the comments below, let me know what you read in September, if you've read any of these books, if you had a weird reading month for September, because I feel like I'm seeing a lot of people say that. I don't know what it is about September, but a lot of us had a lot of trouble. So if you struggled as well, let me know, or if you had an amazing reading month. I post bookish content to this channel fairly frequently, so go ahead and hit subscribe, check back soon, and I will see you next time.